works to collectively advance social and environmental sustainability through knowledge sharing, technology and infrastructure implementation, and most importantly, network building. And we work in partnership with our municipalities to advance sustainability in the region as a whole. So here's a little snapshot of our diverse membership. So we include large household name businesses to municipalities, nonprofits, institutions, and finally some small to medium-sized enterprises. And we work to collaboratively advance social responsibility and environmental sustainability through network sharing and collaboration, knowledge sharing and resource development, technological expertise, and knowledge sharing. And so our members can take advantage of the 4 programs and expertise of our 4 performance areas, including energy management and low carbon transportation, waste management, communication and engagement, and what brings us here today, workshop, water stewardship. So one of our program areas or programs that we offer in the water stewardship program area is the Sustainable Salt Management Resource Hub, where we showcase resources, including Peel Region's Winter Maintenance Online Toolkit, which we'll hear a little bit about later on, and business cases for reducing salt use and utilizing best practices. So our aim is to support businesses across the GTA in reducing their environmental impact, protecting the health and safety of their employees and the surrounding community during the winter months, and to do so in an economically responsible manner. And this is where you can find all the slides from today's presentation and the recordings of today's session. And if you're interested in learning more about Partners in Project Green and how we can help support organizations across the GTA, feel free to shoot me an email. And thank you. I'm going to wrap it up here so we can start the workshop. I'm going to pass it off to Eleanor, who's going to introduce our first speakers.
Actually, we're going to start with a poll question. But thank you, Darlene, and thank you, Annabelle.
Close the transcript window.
Yeah.
So that the screen's bigger for people.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I just wanted to let everybody know too, I am recording this. So I am obligated to let you know. So we do have some poll questions that we'd like to start off with. I believe there's 2 of them. So you should see them on your screen and you should be able to click the answers. And we appreciate if you actually answered them. So those in the room, I have a copy, a paper copy.
So you're not left out.
Yeah.
Can we see what the answer is? So we know.
I submit.
Oh yeah, I can see the responses. On property
32
management.
responses. Thanks.
That's good. Yeah. Are we good?
Yep.
All right, so our first presentation today is from Courtney Hayes and Stuart Simmons from Seneca College. And if you guys want to, you want me to share your presentation or are you going to do it?
I can share my screen just so I can click it easy. Control freak. Can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Amazing. Okay, so hello everyone, good morning. So my name is Courtney Hayes and I am the operations specialist in the Office of Sustainability at Seneca College, or Polytechnic now, oops, sorry. And I also have Stuart Simmons here. So he's working in facilities and he's a big part of the salt management program. So he's also here for any clarifications, any questions, and jumping in with his insights as well. Because this is a big kind of collaboration with the Office of Sustainability and Facilities. Especially my role in operations, working with facilities is a big part of it, and wanting to make sure that we're managing, the sustainability side of everything, but making sure that it does also meet, their operational needs and their logistical needs as well. So it's always that balance, right? But usually the business case for sustainability is there, and it's just being able to have those open conversations. So we're looking forward to sharing our process with you guys here today. Okay, so quick agenda. So looking at Seneca Salt Management Plan, some lessons learned, future plans, and discussions if there's any discussion questions.
Uh-oh.
Let's go. There we go. Me wanting to share my own screen so I could click it easier, and it's not clicking. Okay, so first off, we're going to look at kind of the history of our salt management at Seneca. So in 2019, we introduced the updated snow clearing and ice management service agreement. So this is for our contractors to take care of our salt management program. We updated their service agreement, so embedding some sustainability language, like an environmental language, into their contracts, which we'll kind of get into the weeds in the next slides. So we adjusted some practices as a response to some operational issues. So it's not necessarily in their contract, but some best practices were implemented after we made some lessons learned, which we'll also get into in the next slide here. Then 2020, 2022, some evolving practices to reduce our salt volume and increase the use of ecologically safe brine. So we are always kind of evolving these best practices, and it's why it's so great that we have such an open communication with the team, of being able to get feedback from staff and our community as well, and saying, hey, like, this isn't going to work here, this is too much salt, or where can we put the salt? So we're always kind of evolving those on the ground practices. And then current, we're addressing salt management within the landscape design and maintenance standards. So there's a big initiative right now going forward from the sustainability plan to create standards for landscape design and maintenance. So we're going to be embedding snow management in that as well as pest management and all of these things. So we're having that be embedded directly into how we design and maintain our landscapes. So the summary of our kind of salt management here at Seneca. So who's involved? So the grounds team is responsible for managing areas adjacent to buildings, so right on our actual owned land. External contractors manage the parking lots and the areas that are further from the building. But both groups are managed by the campus facilities. And then the Office of Sustainability enacts the use of ecologically safe grounds maintenance through the standards or policy development, and supports operational teams. So kind of like a consultation role. Let's say, if Stuart comes with, hey, like, we want to do an ecologically safe alternative, give me some ideas. So it'll be kind of my role to look into different alternatives, have meetings like this we're having today, and finding new best practices, and then bringing them to the facilities office and seeing what we can do. So what are the best practices? So the grounds team are encouraged to use less salt and monitor external contractors' usage rates, etc. So that's kind of in the management side of things, is making sure that we're doing this ongoing kind of monitoring and feedback. If there's areas where there's too much salt, just getting back to the grounds team and saying, hey, like, too much salt here, what can we do about it? Why was more salt used here? And kind of having that process throughout the year. External contractors must adhere to the snow clearing and ice management standards. So that was in that contract that I mentioned for 2019, and are responsible for clearing excessive salt and brine. So if there is a situation where there is too much salt, they're responsible for making sure that we're clearing that, so that's not a problem. But what are the kind of core priorities that kind of lead our practices? So we want to demonstrate a commitment to sustainability, of course, it's a big part of Seneca, but we also have to think about the health and safety of campus visitors, and also the operational efficiency and costs. As we'll get into next slides, like some of the alternatives that are out there might be logistically really difficult. They might be really expensive. So we want to make sure that above all else, that's why it's in bold, health and safety is always the priority. And we can kind of use best practices and adjust our logistics to be able to reduce salt rather than have something not work and have people slip and fall, right? So this contract integration that was mentioned for the 2019, 2020 period, it looks like this. So there's three kind of main aspects. The first is having environmental criteria for our contractors. So we have building in sustainable language, environmental language into that contract. Two, and it's kind of related, is sustainability as a key performance indicator. So in the assessment for contractors, having sustainability actually be a line in the assessment when we're doing external vendors. And then three, prescribing the use of brine and like the reasoning of like why brine is important, some sustainability language in the work plan. And we'll get into the details of those things. So one, environmental criteria for contractors. So this is kind of what it looks like. So basically saying that this is kind of similar for all contracts, to be honest, is having this environmental language and making sure that we're having suppliers that use environmentally friendly services and related goods. And it can be fulfilled in a number of ways, whether it's environmental certifications, minimizing the use of packaging, any goods supplied are reusable where possible, using eco certifications. So really leaving it to them to come to us with their environmental considerations or things that are embedded into their products and services. And then when we score them, we have that sustainability section in the vendor assessment. So being able to see like, you know, what do vendors think sustainability means to them? And then sustainability is a key performance indicator. So some language that we have is like demonstrated environmental stewardship. So you have that more broad way of measuring sustainability. So environmental friendliness of the product or service.
Lost your audio.
Sorry. Demonstrated the ability to support Seneca of its sustainability goals. So this is kind of a way to measure that environmental language in the previous slide. So do they have environmental friendly product or service, and are they a vendor that will be able to help us align with our goals? So the future iterations of the RFP process will include sustainable alternatives and practices as a scoring factor. So making sure it's really explicit, because right now it says, you know, things about waste, it says eco certifications, but really saying we want alternatives to these specific materials, just so it primes them, and that's what we're looking for. So 3, prescribed use of pre-brine reasoning in the work plan. So basically liquid brine at all of our campuses starts 3 a.m. or the start of precipitation. So this is kind of just some logistical stuff here. The security will call the supervisor, who then calls the snow personnel. The brine use per campus will be monitored and logged per event for 24-hour weather monitoring. And then there's nightly site monitoring. So there is that really that management side of things, because weather is so unpredictable. Things are unpredictable, so we want to make sure that we're always kind of keeping an eye on how certain areas are influenced or affected by the amount of salt that we have on. And kind of what we're getting into later with the landscape standards is depending on the landscape, depending on how we manage our stormwater, how we plan our green spaces, how we plan our built environment, permeable pavements, that might actually influence, you know, the amount of salt that gets deposited in certain areas and whatnot too, right? So it's always having that monitoring to be able to catch those kinds of things and see if we need to adjust. And just a little quick tidbit is the estimated amount of salt used at Newnham campus was approximately 11 to 13 tons per event, and we could save approximately 30 to 35% of salt per event with liquid brine. So liquid brine was kind of the go-to. This is a very just no thought decision back when they were creating these standards. So our outcomes, And so a little bit of a pivot to something a little bit negative here, but we're learning, we're adjusting. Is so brine was not effective in extremely cold temperatures. So that's where we live. We live in extremely cold temperatures for a significant period of time here in Canada. So the facilities team had to then use salt to minimize the risk during those cold temperatures. So we were still applying salt on top of that brine in some areas. And temperatures drop, the team would deposit salt on top of the existing brine, which is not really operationally efficient either. It's sustainability not really efficient, and then it's annoying to have to be redoing work already done, these kinds of things. And it limited the ability to further reduce the volume of salt as it's beholden to snowfall, and there's a minimum volume that will always be needed. So if it gets really cold, we're gonna have to use salt. Unless we find an alternative that works as effectively, that's kind of like the situation that we're in right now. I'd love to hear from other people and see what they came up with, but it's basically in order to make health and safety, there will always be a minimum amount of salt that gets used, especially in these higher traffic areas. So that's kind of the outcomes of that first iteration of our history. So some resolutions to this: we close non-essential sidewalks, entrances, and parking lots. So we rely on our parking garages during these high snowfall periods to limit the need for salt. So, reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is first. So looking at ways and like some easy wins and being able to just outright cut like a lot of salt use just by not using that space at all. And then the snow must be deposited in the hydro corridor to reduce the size of snow piles around accessible areas. So we have like a parking lot that is away from everything, and we just take all of the snow and deposit it there. It also doesn't, so if we don't have the melting of the snow and just snow piles around accessible areas.
Yeah, it reduces flash freezes as well. Because you get a lot of it, the more snow that melts, the more flash freezes you get as the temperature goes up and down.
Yeah. And I'm assuming, Stuart, if you're having a larger space to be able to put this snow as well, it distributes it around rather than having just a giant pile.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And often, so what we do is we plow all the snow, and we have very limited areas now with our new landscaping. So we plow all the snow to certain piles, and when it hits a certain height, we have them come in with a dump truck and move it over to the hydro corridor. That also helps remove a lot of any kind of salt and dirt and oil that was on the road that was picked up by the snowplow, and we get it off of our gardens, right? So it does help. Yeah.
Awesome. Win-win. And then we also determined that salt would damage the concrete in the parking garage. So like the traditional salt is like erosive to the specific concrete. So we use the environmentally friendly option in those spaces. So we do have an environmentally friendly option that works, but get into the next slide of why we can't use it everywhere. But we do know like that is an option. So it's going to be kind of within this package where we're using multiple solutions to solve the problem. Not just trying to find one thing that fits. So we did find an alternate option for this concrete in the parking garage, in addition to also making sure that the snow and stuff isn't getting in to the parking garage, trying to limit the amount of trailing in that happens. So just always keeping that clean and monitored and stuff to reduce the need of salt in the first place. So going forward, we have some lessons learned and kind of what we're going to be doing as our solution. So one, reduction. Easy, limit entrances, closure of the courtyard and parking lots, and proactive snow removal. So making sure we're just limiting the need to even begin. Two, alternatives. So we have that calcium magnesium acetate, which is used in the parking garage, but it's 10 times the price. So if existing environmentally friendly alternatives are chosen, it must be done in conjunction with like a lot of reduction measures as well that would reduce the volume needed, thus equating to the difference in cost. So we're investigating, okay, if this material is 10 times the price, how can we reduce the amount of salt needed to a point where that balances out, right? So that's what we're trying to do now in consultations with the Office of Sustainability. So this is going forward is going to be kind of like the business case for sustainability that we're trying to find. Three, so policy integration. So we have procurement policy coming down the pipeline at Seneca. So having salt management or these prescriptions to have the environmentally friendly options chosen, just putting in very high level terms right now, but prescriptive to have, we only choose vendors that are using environmental best practices. We look for ways to reduce waste, use of harsh chemicals and whatnot in our procurement policy. So hopefully that captures some of these vendors. And then the landscape standards. For management, so the grounds manager, we're going to be hoping to be getting like more Stuart jump in at this point,
Yeah,
but we're hoping to get a
we-
grounds manager specific for this.
so that they can stay on top of the monitoring, stay on top of, really what it comes down to is if you want to reduce salt, then you have to be more proactive. You have to be monitoring the weather. You have to be ensuring that the areas that you know get snow drifts get cleared right away, and just staying on top of it more. And we need somebody with, you know, their eyes on it at all times, and working much closer with Courtney and her team.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's a nice kind of pattern that we're having at Seneca actually, because you know scopes of facilities is huge, right? Scope of campus services is huge, and being able to have someone that's focused on these more sustainability minded things, that's their focus is really helpful, rather than, you know, having the facilities or grounds manager have to do everything. It's nice to be able to have that focus scope. And then KPIs and tracking. So figuring out what specifically are our KPIs every year. So obviously the use of salt, but we can have other KPIs as well for salt management that we're looking into right now. And then tracking those. Yeah, for sure. We can send that along. Sorry, I read the chat. I got distracted. Yeah, so we're gonna pick like how do we measure how effective our salt management program is, and whatnot, because maybe the salt stays the same, but it's more effective. Like there's so many different ways of kind of looking at it. But yeah, we're gonna be doing some KPIs and tracking. And then kind of going forward, so we have our principles of sustainability here at the Office of Sustainability, Innovation and Leadership, Community, Energy and Emissions, Water, Waste, and Ecology. So we work to embed all of these into every project that we do at Seneca, or action that we do at Seneca, no matter the scale or the scope. So you know, we may not think that something is related to water or energy, for example, but everything usually is indirectly tied. So trying to ask ourselves before we do any initiative, how can we demonstrate or how can we consider these principles into the project? And they are the kind of measurable principles when they're blown out. But these are the high level categories. And obviously, for salt management, a big one is ecology, right? So biodiversity, habitat connectivity, conservation, restoration, soil health and integrity, and low impact development. So obviously, you know, I don't have to really even say like how we can find the connections from salt management to these measurable categories here. So when we are making these KPIs and when we are doing any action, how do they connect to these measurable things here? So making sure that we're helping soil health, that's an easy one, of course. A low impact development with their standards for landscape design. How can low impact development reduce the need for salt, right? So there's all these different ways that we're trying to think of it from a sustainability aspect, from like a very large, not large scale, but like a comprehensive approach to sustainability. So those standards for landscape design and maintenance that I mentioned, so the standards will mirror the principles of sustainability, but they're specific to landscape assessment, design, and maintenance. So how does landscape relate to energy? How does landscape relate to water? These kinds of things. And it's actually a really cool project. So the components must be included in the design. So we have landscape assessments, so ecological assessments. We have maintenance zones, which are really cool, going from naturalized to fully maintained. And then an example species inventory delineated by zone. So in the zones, that species might be maintained differently depending on if it's a fully maintained space or it's a naturalized space. And then standards and policies. So this is where we get into salt management, snow removal and deposition. So these things are going to be embedded in how we design our landscape. So thinking about is there a place in this landscape design where we can put snow and it's safe and it's accessible? Is there, you know, is there a proper stormwater drainage? Is there permeable pavements that can potentially reduce some of this the snow depositions and whatnot? So really thinking about that when we design our landscapes and how we maintain them. And we also are doing this really cool project. Stuart's kind of spearheading this project, but we're doing a comprehensive campus mapping using GIS technology as a part of like a living labs initiative. So working with students, like students are getting the opportunity to work with facilities or working with staff to solve a problem that's on campus, but it's also applicable to, you know, the global community, right? So we're going to do a lot of different layers. There's going to be, you know, utility lines, infrastructure components, things like that, tree species, plant species. We can do anything.
Where we put snow.
Where we put snow, the maintenance zones, where we like so salt management. So for in relation to salt management, where are the salt management areas? Like where are we going to be putting salt and at what level? So if we find that this is a high, you know, salt zone, being able to put that there, low salt zone, put that there. Closures, we can put where it gets closed in the winter. It's really a map, but also within each, like that tree that we put on there, how is that maintained? In this grounds, this green space, how is this maintained? So we can add salt management into that. It's really like a never-ending map that can be added. So many different things can be added, but we found that this is one aspect that could be put on this map that could be helpful even for the grounds team to be able to know, you know, what salt, where does it go, and snow, where does it go, kind of the thing. Yeah, so that concludes my ramble. And if anyone has any questions, I'm not sure how we're doing things here, if like questions are at the end or what's going on, but thank you for your time, everyone. Hopefully that was helpful a little bit, and we'll be here for questions.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Sure. We are going to do questions after a couple more presentations because they're all kind of related to business case studies. And then
we'll probably all answer each other's questions.
You might, yes. So we appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to call on Lorna from CDC, and she's going to do a presentation on using beet juice brine on permeable and asphalt surfaces.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we did a study on salt use at our own head office, so I'll just share what that looked like, some of the results. For some context, in case anyone's not familiar, this is where the Credit River watershed is located. The river itself goes from Orangeville down into Mississauga, and a significant portion of our watershed is within Peel region. So chloride trends in our watershed then, and maybe this is a lot of backtracking for the people in the audience, I'm not sure. When we say road salt, we do typically mean sodium chloride. There are other kinds of salts as well, but chloride is usually involved. So we do monitor chloride trends across the watershed. Our most recent report looked at 23 sites, and it found that concentrations were increasing at 17 of those. There were a couple that were decreasing and stable. And then 11 of those 23 sites were found to be an exceedance of the chronic water quality objective for chloride, which is 120 milligrams per liter. Those sites are the red symbols on the map, and you can see they tend to coincide with urban areas because it's related to salt use. These trends, however, are based on our long-term monitoring program, which collects water quality samples once a month. So it's not capturing the whole spectrum of chloride concentrations. A lot can happen between those samples. So for that reason, we've installed these real-time water quality stations that measure chloride among other parameters at a 15-minute interval. And we have 11 of these that mostly kind of have this setup you can see here. Cooksville Creek is the one that's the most interesting when it comes to chloride. This is showing about 10 years worth of data from that station. It is a small creek that runs through a highly urbanized area. that's been developed for a long time. So there's been salt applied for several decades. It's had a chance to accumulate, and so that we're seeing the in-stream concentrations on this slide. The red line at the bottom is the acute water quality guideline at 640 milligrams per liter. So that's where even a short-term exceedance can be harmful to aquatic life. And you can see how that's almost the baseline that we're sitting at in Cooksville Creek. And then in a lot of winters, we are actually getting to like 20,000 milligrams per liter, which is more or less the concentration of salt water. So this is the data that really prompted our delving into the issue of salt management and trying to understand what's driving this a little bit more. I added also the average winter air temperature to the top, because you can see that it's high. The peaks that are reached in chloride concentrations is highly correlated to the winter severity, especially if you look at like winter of 2013 and 14, the temperatures tend to be quite cold, but then the milder winters like 11 and 12 have slightly lower peaks, although none of the winters are great. So before I get into our salt management plan, I'll just give a little bit of background on salt, how it works. I'm sorry if it's repetitive for a lot of people here. So solid salt needs to come into contact with some kind of moisture to work. So that could be like the snow on the ground, it could be in the atmosphere. Once it comes into contact with moisture, it starts to form a brine. Then that brine spreads out and melts the snow that it comes into contact with to form more brine. So you can kind of see that happening on the picture on the right. Sodium chloride will typically work down to about -10. But then if you need it to work at colder temperatures, you can add certain things to the salt, like different kinds of salts or organic additives like beet juice. One of the leading best practices, as we just heard, is the use of brines or liquids. So it's essentially just any kind of salt dissolved in water. And because the granular salt needs some kind of moisture there to start melting, if you're putting liquid down directly, then you're kickstarting that process. So it can start melting, start working a lot faster. And because it's mostly water, there's a lot less chloride being used. Typically, it's used as an anti-icer. So it's applied to the surface prior to the event happening. That means that the snow and ice that forms has less of a chance to form a bond with the pavement and makes it easier to plow away afterwards. So you don't have to put down as much salt after the fact in order to melt the remaining snow or ice after plowing. And again, sometimes it's diluted with an organic product like beet juice. The one you can see here is a beet brine, and that will help it work at a lower temperature, and it can be a bit stickier. So you have a little more wiggle room in terms of how soon before the event it gets applied. And adding an organic also further reduces the chloride content of the product. So our head office then, we created a salt management plan, and it's our first iteration of this plan, really because we wanted to make sure that we were, first of all, that we were walking the talk, that we were implementing the best practices that we're encouraging others to implement, and also to get a real understanding of the challenges that businesses face when they're trying to implement best practices on their properties. So at a very high level, our salt management plan then encourages the use of liquids and liquid anti-icing as much as possible. We've said not to use any kind of sand or product to increase traction in that way, because we have permeable surfaces and it can clog the space in between the pavers and reduce the infiltration capacity. And then there was a question around whether liquids should be used on permeable pavements or not, because we've read some advice out there that's kind of based on the assumption that the surface is permeable. So if you put liquid down on it, it's just going to infiltrate and it not work. But we didn't really see any evidence where anyone had tested that theory. So we wanted to test it. And I thought, if you have a paving stone that's this big, then you must have some liquid that's able to stick to it. And especially if you're using a beet brine that tends to be a bit stickier, do you have enough of that material left over to work?
I would respectfully ask that you not take So sometimes we've had.
Oh,
we have a better-
Someone asking a question?
No, I think
Oh, no.
Someone's just. Okay, and it doesn't include sidewalks at this point. We're just talking about the actual parking lot surface. So the main things we wanted to know from this study then was see how well is,
I'm trying to find them right now.
to know how well is the salt management plan working? So are we still maintaining safe surface conditions and are we reducing our salt use over time? That's obviously going to be a long-term question that we try and answer. And ultimately, we wanted to know how effective are liquids on permeable pavements? Is it something that we should be encouraging or avoiding, as some of the guidance that we have read suggests? So our parking lot has permeable and asphalt surfaces. The parking lot shown in blue here are permeable, and then the gray areas are asphalt. There are two parts to this study. The portion I'm calling parking lots is just where we kind of dealt with the contractor data. So they were able to provide us with the amount of salt that they applied separately to the permeable surfaces and to the asphalt surfaces, which was really great. We also installed cameras that collected images once every 15 minutes, so we could track how long it takes for the snow to melt. And then there's another study we did where we cordoned off these specific parking stalls, some on the permeable, some on the asphalt surface. Those are marked with the stars, the yellow stars on this map. We told the contractor not to touch this area at all, and we did our own study there. So we manually applied product ourselves, we cleared the area ourselves, and measured friction. Okay, so the results of the first part then, we were just looking at the contractor data. I'll start by just showing some time-lapse videos of what these surfaces look like during an event. This is our permeable surface. So it's been plowed at this point. There hasn't been any salt put down yet. You can see there's still like fairly even snow coverage after plowing. And then the salt gets applied. You can see the specific route that the truck took when it applied it, so it wasn't applied super evenly, and so you can see a lot of melting happening where the truck went by, and not a whole lot of spread beyond that area. And then eventually another snowfall started to happen, which accumulated at a lower rate in the areas where the truck had been. So this is our permeable lot. And then here's one, this is a different event from our asphalt parking lot. So here it's been plowed, it hasn't been salted yet. This is where our fleet parking was. So the plow couldn't really get around there. Those vehicles were there all the time. The sun came out, so there was some melting just from having the sun. There still hasn't been any salt yet. And there's when the salt was applied, suddenly the melting kick starts and starts to spread. So you see more kind of even, I guess, bare pavement here, but it looks a little bit wetter than the permeable surface did. So you have kind of the slush left over afterwards. Those are just some typical events on the permeable and asphalt surfaces. We calculated the bare pavement regain time, which is the time it takes to achieve bare pavement from salt application. So apply salt and then see how long it takes until you get to conditions that look kind of like what you see on these pictures, from the permeable on the left and the asphalt on the right. So the distribution of bare pavement regain times for the asphalt and permeable surfaces are shown on this plot. You can see that the asphalt tends to achieve bare pavement faster than the permeable does, but there's a caveat that this is just based on the analysis of photos from our cameras. So it doesn't capture the fact that when the asphalt is bare, it's actually kind of wet, whereas the permeable tends to be drier. And this is kind of zooming in on that issue. So if you look at the melting pattern of when you put salt down on asphalt on the left, It forms that brine, and then the brine has nowhere to go, so it stays on the surface, and you get ponding and, you know, kind of slush forming, like you can see on that picture. Whereas on the right, on the permeable, the brine will form around each little salt granule, but then eventually it's going to reach a point where it infiltrates, and so it doesn't spread. So the picture on the right wouldn't meet the standard of bare pavement, but it's also drier than the picture on the left. So it may actually be safer conditions. So it's something to consider. So I'll talk a little bit about how we set up these tests on the separate plots. So we set aside 5 plots on the permeable and asphalt surfaces, and we used 4 different materials, and then had 1 set aside for a control where we didn't apply any material at all. So one of them we applied a sodium chloride brine. One of them we applied a beet juice brine, so sodium chloride with a beet juice additive. One of them we had a solid rock salt, so typical rock salt only, and then we had a pre-treated rock salt, which was a salt that had some of that beet juice product sprayed on it just to add the moisture. So prior to each event, we would put down the product on that plot, then let the snowfall happen, then shovel away the snow, measure the friction, put down the same product as de-icer, and then continue to measure the friction to see how that changed over time, and also look at cameras that showed us the melting pattern. This is how the friction played out. So this plot is actually kind of showing slipperiness rather than friction. So a lower value here represents a better friction. The colored bars at the top represent areas where you're getting into safe condition. So the top ones is showing asphalt, the bottom ones is showing permeable. Each bar is one of those different products. The blue one on the left is the control. And then we have at 3 different time intervals. So immediately after shoveling, before any kind of de-icer was applied, then 1 hour after applying de-icer, and 2 hours after applying de-icer. So the main thing I think to point out here is how the friction is better across the board on the permeable surface and the asphalt surface. And I think that comes down to the moisture that's left over on the asphalt. You do see an increase in friction after the de-icer is applied on both surfaces. There's not a big difference on the asphalt, but from 1 to 2 hours really. And there's not a huge difference between products. I think we would need to capture more events to really be able to say whether one product worked better than the other. But I think it really indicates that the permeable has more consistent high friction levels, because the range of friction as well is a lot smaller on the permeable than the asphalt. Even if you look at the control where no material was used at all. These are our test plots on the permeable surface. So from the left is the control, and then you can see the 2 spots on the right where the liquid was applied. So here we're trying to understand that question of, if you put liquid on a permeable pavement, is it all just going to infiltrate? And we can see that no, it's not. I'm sure some of it is infiltrating. We're not really able to measure that, but you can see that the snow is not sticking to the ground. It's not accumulating in the way it is on the other plots. So there is enough material left over on the permeable surface to work. So in conclusion, we did find that the conventional asphalt had a faster bare pavement regain time, but based on looking at those friction tests, that doesn't necessarily translate into a faster friction regain time, which is really the end goal we're trying to achieve. In terms of permeable pavements, any product that you put down on it, whether it's a solid or a liquid, is going to be less efficient in a way on permeable than asphalt, because some of it will be lost to infiltration. As I said at the beginning, the solid rock salt doesn't work until it's able to form a brine. So either way, there's a brine there on the surface that's going to be infiltrating if the surface is permeable. But we did find that there was enough liquid on the surface to have an impact. I think this indicates that we may need a better definition of level of service on permeable pavements, that bare pavements shouldn't necessarily be the goal if it's a permeable surface. We did look at the salt application rates between the two surfaces and found them to be similar because we didn't ask the contractor to do anything different on the two surfaces, so that's to be expected. But because that brine infiltrates and doesn't spread as readily on the permeable as the asphalt, there was a lot of rock salt left over after each application. So we think that we could, because of that residual left over, reduce application rates in the future on the permeable. And that's it for this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. So we'll let Lorna have a little sip of water before she is our next presenter, actually. And she will be presenting on reducing chloride application with liquid anti-icing. We'll just give her a minute to organize herself. There are some questions in the chat, so we will take those after Lorna's presentation and hopefully get a little bit of a discussion. Take your time. Keep forgetting where to look.
Okay, so I'm doing another presentation because I also recently completed a master's degree at Toronto Metropolitan University, looking at something similar, looking at the use of liquid anti-icing on parking lots, but trying to really quantify how much chloride can be saved by using liquid anti-icing. I'll very briefly go through this slide. We do know, obviously, there's harmful effects of road salt, and concentrations are increasing universally in cold areas in urban regions. In some cases, up to 50% of salt can be applied to parking lots in some watersheds. So that's why we have this focus on parking lots. And in Canada, we do have the code of practice for the environmental management of road salts, but it's voluntary. It only applies to organizations putting down salt on roads or highways. We don't have any kind of regulation or guidance when it comes to parking lots. So that tends to incentivize over application of salt rather than appropriate application. But as we just talked about, there are best management practices, chiefly liquid anti-icing. And I'm gonna not go over this part, but here's just a nice picture of some brine being applied on the TMU campus. So what I wanted to understand then was, does using liquid anti-icing on a parking lot reduce the amount of chloride that needs to be used, and by how much? And then I also compared a typical sodium chloride brine to a beet brine to see if that had an impact on the amount of chloride that was needed. So I worked with a contractor to use these 3 different treatments over 9 parking lots and 3 winter seasons. So the first, I call it a tactic, is a sodium chloride brine plus rock salt. The second one is beet brine plus rock salt. And then the third one is rock salt only. So the first 2 are the liquid anti-icing best practices. So it's either applying the sodium chloride brine or the beet brine prior to the snowfall. Snowfall happens, then the site's plowed, and then if needed, additional rock salt is put down. Under the rock salt only scenario, typically nothing is put down prior to the event. In some cases, they did put down a little bit of rock salt as anti-icer. Then the snowfall happens, then it was plowed, and then rock salt put down as de-icer afterwards. I wanted to rotate these treatments across the 9 sites as much as possible. So they were grouped into groups of 3, and each group of parking lots received the same treatment. The property manager of the group A parking lots requested that beet brine be used consistently, so I wasn't able to rotate the treatments as much as I wanted. But this is the study design that we were aiming for. And over the course of 3 years, I was able to capture data from 28 winter weather events that looks like this. So this is showing for each event and for each parking lot, what was the chloride application rate that was used. So if we look at one of the red dots that represents a beet brine plus rock salt application, that value is showing you the average chloride application rate for that event, for that parking lot. That comes from both the chloride in the beet brine and the chloride in the rock salt that went down afterwards. You can see that there's a lot of variation from event to event. If we look at events like 17 through 20, for example, the rates are a lot higher across the board. So if there is a more severe event, then essentially the baseline of required salt application goes up, and it goes up for all of, regardless of the treatment that you're using. So for this reason, it was really important just to look within each event and see which treatment type resulted in lower chloride application. So accounting for any of those event-specific factors. There were some other factors that the contractor pointed out that could influence chloride application rates. For example, the client requesting to come back and put down additional salt, any uncertainty in weather forecasting, like having an event forecast that didn't end up occurring, having residual material left over, having access to the right equipment and materials for that event. And then there were issues with staff training as well, and the operators on site not applying salt in the way that is intended. So ultimately, I found that in 24 out of 26 events, using only rock salt resulted in a higher chloride application rate than using any kind of liquid anti-icer. So if we take this plot and look at the first event, for example, there's number 3 at the top. That means that 3 parking lots received the rock salt only treatment for that event, and 6 of them received either of the liquid anti-icing treatments. So I took the median chloride application rate of those 3 and of those 6, and then calculated the relative percent difference between the 2. And any bar that's a positive number means that the higher application rate was with the rock salt. The higher median application rate was with the rock salt. So only 2 events out of these 26 did not follow that pattern, and there are caveats associated with it. So for event 12, this was when there was a staff training issue. The operator on site ended up putting down a lot more brine than the contractor would typically do. And then during event 16, there was a weather forecasting issue where there was a snow event forecast. They put down anti-icer, but then it ended up being a much smaller event than they had predicted. I also compared sodium chloride brine to the beet brine and found that in 9 out of 11 events, using a beet brine actually resulted in a lower chloride application rate than using sodium chloride brine alone. And once again, there's caveats associated with the events that don't fit that pattern. So event 3 was one where there were client complaints. So the client of 2 of the 3 parking lots receiving the beet brine requested that the contractor come back and put down more salt afterwards. And then the event 4 is slightly negative, but I think it's basically a 0. I did wonder whether the chloride content of the product itself, the fact that the beet brine contained less chloride than the sodium chloride brine, was influencing the results on the previous slide. But the amount of chloride in the anti-icer is less than 25%. I mean, the amount of all the chloride that's applied to the parking lots, less than 25% of it comes from the liquid product. The vast majority of it comes from the rock salt itself. So this plot is showing the total chloride applied divided by the parking lot area for only the events where liquid anti-icing was used. So it's excluded all the rock salt only events. And it shows how much of the chloride came from the anti-icer versus the de-icer. So anytime, if you have to increase the amount of brine that goes out in order to decrease the amount of rock salt, then that's going to have a net benefit in terms of reducing chloride application. And the beet brine looks like it's slightly higher than the sodium chloride brine, but that's just because it was used more frequently. So to summarize, there was a result I didn't present here, but that found that only 6.4% of the total variance in chloride application was explained by that choice of using a beet brine or sodium chloride brine or using rock salt only. But that's when you account for that all the impacts of weather. However, weather isn't something we can control for. So we can control. So if we only look at within the same event and see the impact of what we can control, which is our choice of using liquid anti-icing, it resulted in about 31% chloride savings over rock salt only. And then comparing beet juice brine to sodium chloride brine, using beet juice had a 32% chloride savings as well. There are environmental impacts associated with beet juice though, and we've been applying rock salt year after year, decade after decade, and we have a very good idea of what happens in receiving water courses, what the environmental impacts are. We don't have that information when it comes to beet juice. We have an idea of what might happen, but we need to know more about the scale of application, what concentrations you would expect to find in a downstream river, for example. So until we can answer a lot of those questions, it's about balancing the trade-off between the potential environmental impacts of beet juice and the benefits of reducing chloride application. But the important takeaway is that liquid anti-icing, regardless of which product is being used, can achieve significant chloride savings. And I measured that out. If you look at the parking lot on this slide, is 20,000 square meters. If you apply that 31% chloride savings to that parking lot, then it results in a reduction of salt application that amounts to 20 of these bags of salt per event. So if you picture that across a city, it could be significant. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Both your presentations.
Thank you.
So we have heard 3 different presentations, all with case studies done in parking lots. And if anybody has any questions, either raise your hand or we will go through some of the ones in the chat. Roshini asks, Courtney, would you be able to share a copy of your KPIs?
Yeah, I can. They're in development right now though, so I don't know if they'll be ready now. We're still thinking of how we're gonna want to measure everything. And we're gonna actually offline, we got inspired by some of the presentations. We're gonna probably get student research involved for different applications of different methods. So I will definitely reach out when we finalize them.
Great, thank you. Yep, we've got a question in the room.
Yes, my question is about what level of grip or traction on a parking lot is the standard? So for example, how soon you want the traction to, and is it expected to regain traction to complete bare pavement, or is it somewhere there? So what is the expected? Because you can apply less salt, 30%, 50%, and you may or may not regain traction to what you would get in summertime. But is it expected to so you need some traction to be able to safely walk or drive on a wet surface. But you measure traction slipperiness. And the question I'm asking is, do we have a standard? For example, when we look at Seneca or when we look at your parking lot, if we put less salt, whether it's liquid or rock salt, what is the expectation that, what sort of traction? Because if you put less salt, you still achieve some level of traction, maybe 50% of what you would get on the dry surface, but that may be acceptable. Why do we need to regain complete traction that you would get in summertime, particularly if it's a salt vulnerable area? So that's my question of, how do you assess performance of a contractor, whether it's in Seneca or your parking lot, to say, good job, like you have met my standard? Because they could put less salt, they could put more salt. And how do you ensure or assess the quality of the performance of that job after they're done?
I mean, it's a big question, and I think like it's the question we need to be asking ourselves, right? Because we have been using bare pavement as the standard, but that's not reflective of traction, because that's a visual thing that's easy to assess. And I think our results looking at the difference between asphalt and permeable shows that bare pavement does not equal traction. So yeah, I think we need to be having this conversation and figure it out. And we need liability protection to help us with that, because
there's an expectation. I can speak for Seneca. There's an expectation that people are wearing correct winter footwear. When we clear our parking lots, we're mostly concerned with walkways. We're not concerned necessarily with clearing the entire parking lot back to a summer standard. When you get out of your car, we can't clear in between the cars, but we can clear sort of the walkway to like in the parking lot towards the pathways, and that's our concern. We have to be concerned about slip and falls and liabilities and everything else, but there is a level of expectation for each person that they're walking in the winter. So we don't shoot for a percentage like 80% or anything like that. We just ensure that pathways are cleared and maintained. And we do that often on a daily routine. We walk through, and if there's any areas that are deemed unsafe, we treat those areas.
I could ask a follow-up question. So let's say one is how fast you regain bare pavement or traction, and we notice difference between liquid versus rock salt. And is there a requirement for a standard on that in terms of how quickly? Because on roads, we have 7 different road classes, and the expectation for Highway 401 or expressway is different than a primary road than a secondary road in a city, because the risk of accident is higher when you're driving faster or there are more cars driving. So for a parking lot, should the standard be similar to 401, or should the standard be similar to a primary road in a city or a secondary road, or even less? So how soon do you need to regain bare pavement or traction on a parking lot as opposed to a different road? The amount of salt we put on 401 is 3 times higher than what we put on a second primary road or a secondary road. So you could actually put 4 times less than 401 on a parking lot and achieve acceptable level of grip if the standard or acceptable level of grip is different, like, or how fast you need to regain traction, depending on if you go 3 a.m. to put your salt, how many hours, we should 5 hours or 10 hours before people show up. So in terms of depending on when the storm hits, or if you look at different storms, severity of storms, how do you know, did you put the right amount of salt? So if the storm is more intense or more severe, colder or different, if you're not measuring grip or traction after every storm, how do you ensure, did I put the right amount of salt, or did I put more salt than I should have, or did I put less salt than I should have? If there is no way to tell, did I put the right amount of salt on a given location?
I mean, in terms of time to bare pavement on parking lots, like it's essentially when does the building open? And when does the storm happen relative to that? So it's
Because highways have a standard,
Mhm.
like how many hours you
Yeah.
need to regain, but for parking lots, do you have a standard?
I don't think there is a standard at the moment, but that's where, we are striving to have something. Because, you can't compare a go parking lot on the condition that everybody is going there with their formal shoes, which are slippery. The standards are totally different. They want to apply as much as they want. But if you are coming to say CVC parking lot, that standard may be a little bit lower, or even where, general knowledge is there that you have to put the shoes or the footwear, which is required for those conditions, right? So it's a difficult question, and that's where the answer needs to be there. But that's where we are saying that, okay, if the studies have been done that, if you apply a little bit excess salt, that would provide a little bit more traction, right? Because it's still sitting there like we used to apply sand, right, for traction. But if you apply too much, then it reduces traction, right? So you have to have a kind of a sweet point somewhere where it's more active and more workable. But that's what we are trying to show here, that with different products, even if you, whenever you want your level of service to be depending upon what type of organization or what type of, usage of that parking lot is, that still having, anti-icing with the liquid, and especially with beet juice, because it sticks for longer time, would be more beneficial to the environment compared to, whatever traditional.
We've got 3 people online that want to ask a question, so I'm going to go to Claudio. You want to unmute?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
So my question is for Seneca, and you touched on the expectation that you have that visitors, people, students, whatever, need to wear a certain, I guess, footwear in the winter, which makes sense. How do you communicate that to people that are coming to your buildings, or students that come to your buildings? And it's so I'm the property manager for the building that you're in right now, right? And that's a real challenge, because in one hand, we try to communicate, wear proper shoes, right? People still don't. Then health and safety comes along and says, hey, you need to put more salt out because people they're slipping. So it's an endless battle that we have here. And my question is whether your salt program or your winter maintenance program has a communication plan associated to it that helps you communicate what you're trying to do.
I think that kind of communication aspect would even fall within the Office of Sustainability, like when the winters come, saying, hey, everyone, like we have this salt management program, so just make sure this is what we're doing for our program. There may be areas in the parking lot, like if, make sure that you're wearing proper shoes, but we do just communicating the salt management program, but there will be areas like in parking lots where, because we're reducing salt, we don't have excessive salt in all areas of the parking lot. So that could be something that we can communicate. But I think, and Stuart, feel free to jump in, but I think that a lot of it comes down to doing your due diligence, making sure things aren't insane in the parking lot, making sure it's walkable. But when it comes down to liabilities, if someone wanted to complain formally that they slipped and they were wearing flip-flops in the winter, and we have in our liability, in our formal liability policies and whatnot, that there's an expectation within reasonable that people are wearing shoes in the winter. I don't know, I feel like it would come down to that kind of a thing, right?
That's
So
all
there-
we can do, and I'm sure the college is no different than any other environment where people will not read signs. We have TV screens all over the campuses where we advertise and we communicate messages exactly like that, but people don't see it. So you have to do a policy, and you have to have, when it comes to a liability issue, you have to have all of that at least communicated, whether they read it or not. And like everybody's saying, there's an expectation in the winter to wear winter shoes.
Okay, so you guys do have a written policy
We do.
that protects the colleges or your entity from.
We do on our liability side, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. That was actually a really good question. Daniel.
Hi, everyone. Great chats today. I apologize. I'm going to do a little shameless self-promotion here. But some of my colleagues are also in the room right now. So I'm from Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and I'm part of the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program. So we've done a lot of stuff talking about best management practices for salt application. I'll share some resources in the chat as we go along today. I won't take up too much time. But Claudio, you mentioned like talking about best management practices. We were talking a little earlier about, talking about standardization. Standardization in this country takes a bit, where it's all volunteer hours, especially with CSA or SCC. So that's something that definitely is needed, and I'm sure a couple of the experts in this room could be on this committee, and that's something that should probably be brought up to the CSA to start developing a standard of that magnitude. But in terms of certification for for public or private owners, Claudio, like yourself, there's the Smart About Salt Council that was developed specifically for this, for property owners, for the contractors who actually do the salt spreading. So it actually talks about what is the equipment you're using, what are the new updates you're adding to your equipment to make sure you're spreading some of these additives, whether it's a beet juice additive or it's a brine additive. And it actually goes through, and it's a online training course that they can take part in. It's a paid training course. We've gone over it for certification, and it's applied across Ontario and Canada. So Smart About Salt Council, I'll add that in there. And then ourselves at STEP, we have our low impact development planning and design guidance that we've turned into an online wiki. We have a whole page on salt management, best management practices, and we've probably got about 10 different case studies talking about the benefits of LIDs with salt reduction, but as well sidewalk and parking lot maintenance manuals and the salt application verified equipment program that's also part of the Smart About Salt Council. So I can add a bunch of those links in there. I just don't want to spam the chat too much, but just thought that might be of some use.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Do you have another one?
I think you have a few more in here.
Oh, you
We're
are the
running out of break time now.
Yeah,
so I
that's
don't
true.
know
We
if
should give
we
them a
wanna-
break.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna actually stop here. We're going to, there's a few questions in the chat, so we'll try to answer them over the break. And we're gonna have a break for, what time is it?
10:31.
Okay.
When does the 10 until 30?
Yeah, we'll do a 10-minute break, so we'll come back at 10:40. And we'll start the next session, and we'll continue with questions afterwards. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're just getting our seats. I hope everybody took a little break, got up and stretched. Our next sorry, we're going to do another poll while everybody's getting settled. So please, if you could fill out the poll that's on the screen. For those in the room, it's on your piece of paper. Oh, there's two. If they're in your chat.
Oh, we'll see if this Word Cloud one works.
Like it did. So the one poll question is actually not a multiple choice, but if you could actually type in what kind of information, support, or tools would be helpful for you, either as a contractor or a property operator or owner.
Cool. the result coming? It's like a cloud.
Ah, look at that.
Cool, right?
Yeah. We've got some answers to that last question. Thank you for those that responded. I'm sure we're all seeing similar answers. Great. Yeah. Keep them coming. Okay, I'm going to now get ready to introduce Joe. Sorry, there's no names on my sheet, but yeah, Joe from Landscape Ontario. And he is doing a presentation on contractor approach to winter maintenance using exclusively, nope, sorry, wrong presentation. Did you panic? Working with snow and ice management contractors from an environment and liability perspective. Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. And first of all, thank you for putting this together and asking me to appreciate that. So I'm the executive director here with Landscape Ontario and have been for exactly a year. So yeah, thank you. I've been working with landscape contractors and snow and ice contractors for the better part of 20 years and understanding their challenges and difficulties that they've experienced over that amount of time. So when Eleanor asked me to talk about this, I was like, great, this is what we're living and breathing right now. So first, a little bit about Landscape Ontario. We are a voluntary not-for-profit trade association, and we represent 3,000 member companies across the province. We have 9 regional chapters and represent 11 sector groups. So when we say landscape, we know that it means much, much more than that, including irrigation and lighting and turf management and snow and ice management and much more. So we represent the entire value chain of landscape horticulture in the province. And then, of course, what we do is advance the industry through professional development, education, advocacy, and public promotion. And what we're all about today and what we've been focused on for the last several years is working with snow and ice contractors. We estimate that there's about 8,000 snow and ice contractors in Ontario. And about 1,100 of those are members of Landscape Ontario. And the services that they would typically provide are residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, public. And the companies that are snow and ice management contractors that belong to Landscape Ontario generally have a service mix that includes landscape maintenance, grounds care, and commercial landscape construction. So they're not just purely snow and ice contractors. And those professional snow and ice contractors are the ones that do lots and lots of pre-event planning and site inspections before the winter months come upon us. So the current issues, as we see them, and we've lived and breathed them for the last probably 3 or 4 years now, the de-icing practices that currently happen don't align with the environmental values of the contractors. And so that's something that pains us every single time. Every time our contractors go and lay down salt and they're putting way more than they need to, it's not because they want to. It's because of a fear of liability. That's what it comes down to. So the result is that they're shouldering the bulk of the liability risk, and that comes through contracts. And Landscape Ontario has developed a standard snow and ice management contract that the contractor can take to a property owner. And contract is a fair and balanced load of the liability risk. Because of the issues that have been happening, a significant amount of fraudulent slip and fall claims and real slip and fall claims, insurance rates have skyrocketed. There's been a number of underwriters in the insurance market in Canada that have outright gotten out of the business of underwriting snow liability coverage. And what that means is that the market has hardened incredibly. We got to a point where there was only 3 underwriters in the entire country that were writing snow liability insurance. And for months, I received phone calls on a daily basis from business owners that had snow and ice management services as part of their service mix that were saying they just have to stop. They can't, first of all, they can't afford the insurance. Their insurance premiums from one year to the next, not because of claim history, just because of the way that the market is hardened, saw an increase in their premium, their annual premiums of 400 or 500%. So if your insurance premium, let's say it was about $15,000 or $20,000 per year, it could have easily went to $75,000, and we've seen it. And so when you have multi-year contracts, you can't all of a sudden just pass that along to your client. So it means that you have to absorb it somehow. So the skyrocketing insurance rates called quite a bit of the snow contractors in the market. So there's significantly less contractors in the market now to be able to do that work. So the availability of coverage has also been an issue. It's just been one of those things where, you know, when I get the phone call from a business owner that says, I can't do this anymore, and they're in tears because it's not through any fault of their own. They do all the right things, and it's just the way that the market has hardened. So it's been a really tough thing. Recruiting staff, trying to get people to do the work, to put in the really long hours of working all night through a snow event, just isn't as appealing. And so it's been really difficult to recruit new people to do this kind of work. And the rising business costs, we all know, everyone that has a car that takes gasoline knows just how much fuel costs right now. And we've seen in the supply chains just how much material has gone up. Cost of labor, auto insurance rates have also significantly increased. So all these rising business costs have made it that much harder to do business. So from the environmental perspective, the excessive use of salt, like I mentioned, not any one of them wants to put down more than they need to. There's a tremendous amount of work being done to mitigate that, in investment in tools and equipment, and through the use of liquids. But the reason that they're putting down more salt than they need to is to cover their butts at the end of the day. And so, you know, from the environmental perspective, it's we know that the excessive use of salt is contaminating waterways, creating soil erosion, affecting wildlife. It has a significant effect on infrastructure damage, both public and private. And then when there is infrastructure damage, the contractor is then liable for that. So we'll get into that in the next slide. But it has both the environmental and liability effects. The changing weather patterns causing more freeze and thaw cycles. So when we see snow piles start to melt, and then we get overnight freeze, and you know, there's still lots of monitoring, but sometimes you can't be on top of it as quickly as you might need to. And then there's a slip and fall that happens as a result. You know, there's lots of issues that come along with the changing weather patterns, and we're seeing more extreme weather events. This winter, in our geography, we saw the majority of the snow events happen in March. Right? And so we're used to seeing lots of snow events kind of spread out through the winter, but it was really concentrated in March this year. And at the end of the day, contractors do want to use less material. They are stewards of the environment. They, remember that their service mix does include working in the warm months and using environmentally best practices for managing landscapes. So to have to go and completely throw that all out the window when it comes to snow and ice management pains them greatly. And so this is a topic of lots of our conversations and training and professional development that we run at Landscape Ontario. So I had mentioned before that many contractors are investing in technology that supports the reduction in salt use, such as liquids, calibrated distribution equipments. There's a company right now that is exploring real-time calibration on the fly on trucks to measure ground temperature and ground moisture real time to instantly recalibrate the amount of salt being put down at any given moment based on speed of the vehicle traveling. So that's all happened. And in testing right now, we're going to be looking at kind of a demonstration of that next week at our snow contractors event. Now, of course, this was mentioned earlier. Smart About Salt. I sit on their board of directors. This is an excellent program, and it started out of the region of Waterloo, and just an absolutely fantastic program. Full of great training and information. Lots of contractors take advantage of it, but not nearly enough. I think there's just over about 100 contractors that are certified Smart About Salt at the moment. And through some connected research through Vineland Research and Innovation Center, we've contributed to research on salt-resistant trees for highway and roadway trees, and that's shown a lot of great results so far. So on top of just reducing the amount of salt, we're looking at hardy trees that can survive all of the salt that are put on roadways and highways and parking lots. From the liability perspective, the liability risk is preventing the reduction in salt use. So much so that contractors seem to put down, in some cases, way more salt than they need to, and then it becomes its own separate slip and fall hazard, the equivalent of trying to walk on marbles. And we've seen slip and fall cases go to settlement as a result of putting too much salt down. So the ending sentiment from a contractor's perspective is you can't. It's a lose-lose scenario. You're trying to cover your butt to try and reduce the liability. You want to reduce the amount of salt to protect the environment, and then when you try and oversalt, you're going to be faced with potential slip and fall claims at the same time. We've also seen that property owners are demanding oversalting to avoid slip and fall risks because they themselves don't want to have to worry about potential slip and falls. And so asking for more and more salt to be put down. So what we need to look at is a unified approach on all of this, and contractors absolutely want to work with property owners to make sure that we're all using the right amount of salt. There's been a massive uptick in the frequency of litigation. I get to be part of some of the larger discoveries cases that are put forward, and more and more contractors are investing in technology systems to track not just the amount of salt, but find GPS location, as well as vehicle speed and weather conditions and ground temperature at the same time. So that when it comes to discovery, they've got all that information to be able to present. Yeah, contractors are leaving the sector, and we are seeing a shortage of services. And we're starting to see it now. Many large property owners start to book their snow and ice services or re-up their contracts in July. And we've already seen and heard from those large property owners that the same amount of bids just aren't coming through. So there is a shortage. We're seeing it now, and because the same liability issue doesn't quite exist when it comes to residential services, we're seeing those companies go and servicing more on a residential side than commercial, institutional, or industrial. So like I mentioned, they're investing in software systems that allow geotagging for the snowplow operators. For example, as soon as they enter into a defined geofence, they'll automatically clock them into that property, and then it'll follow their route through a parking lot and measure the amount of salt that's been put down. Investing in weather monitoring, both software and hardware that accurately reports ground temperature, combined with on-site cameras that have sensors built in. This hardware is really expensive right now, but as we see it become more commonplace, we'll start to see the price of this equipment come down. We're working with a company called KSMI Weather, and it has access to the road weather information system. So contractors can then access the cameras and understand ground temp within kind of micro geography at that point, so that they can then dispatch crews based on weather events, what's happening in real time. See that they're spending much more time doing pre-season on-site inspections to correct any kind of deficiencies on properties. So if there are low spots that are not directly close to drainage, then those contractors are then requesting property owners to have those deficiencies repaired in time for the winter season, so that we can mitigate as much possibility for pooling and freeze and thaw cycles. So the idea is to remove all those hazards way ahead of time and get moving, so that it's as easy as possible to maintain the site. So all of that to say, we're taking some action on this. We're not just sitting idly by. The snow and ice management sector in Ontario has asked Landscape Ontario to take the lead in advocating on their behalf. So we started that with Bill 118, and that was reducing the statute of slip and falls from 2 years to 60 days. Initially, we had lobbied to reduce that statute from 2 years to 10 days, but we heard that there was a significant injury lawyer lobby that was going to push back hard on that and would have stalled the adoption of that bill quite some time. So we came together and we worked together on a statute limitation of 60 days. And we're still seeing slip and falls come in at 59 days, you know. But there is a loophole in all this, in that the notification of a slip and fall needs to go to the property manager within that 60 days. The contractor does not need to be notified inside the 60 days. So there's a loophole that we need to close on that still. We've seen that tested in court now, and so now we have to do some additional work. So our work on Bill 18 isn't quite done. And we've, earlier this year, we've initiated and engaged with a government relations firm to go on a campaign to balance the liability expectation. There was some discussion earlier about what the expectation is following a snow event. And we still see that the public expectation after a snow event is dry pavement. And we know, all of us know in this room and online, that that's just not a possibility. So we need to really reset what that expectation is. And you know, the other comment about having proper footwear. I've been part of discoveries where people have been in dress shoes right after a massive snow event, have slipped and fallen, and they've hurt themselves, and have still won a large settlement. So just because you've set a policy of making sure you wear proper footwear doesn't mean that it's still not going to get settled by the insurance company. So that's still a real risk. So we are actively lobbying the provincial government right now, and we're asking the provincial government now to regulate the snow and ice management sector through required training and accreditation. We're asking for standards. We've written a standard, and we're looking for the provincial government to adopt that. We've approached the Canadian Standards Association and the Technical Safety Standards Association to adopt our standard or rewrite it. So far, we haven't made a whole lot of progress there. But the fact that we have our own, if we don't make progress with the provincial government, we're rolling it out anyway and asking our members to abide by it. But for now, you know, we're actively lobbying. We've developed the curriculum, we've developed the accreditation process, and now looking for the stamp of approval from the provincial government. So far, we've met with the Premier's office, we've met with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, the Ministry of Transportation, and the Ministry of Economic Development, Jobs Creation, and the T stands for.
Almost at it.
Yeah, we call it MenchCat for short. So we've met with all of those ministries and the Premier's office, and all have their support. It's very possible that we might have something in the fall economic statement to drive progress on this. So we're pushing really, really hard, and you know, hopefully we can make some progress here. So coming up next week, we have Snowposium. It's the largest gathering in Canada for snow contractors. We get almost 400 contractors across the province that come to this event annually. It's held at our office in Milton. We'd like to extend an invitation to all of you. I'll make sure that Eleanor gets the link and my email address. So if you'd like to come, just shoot me a note. We'll make sure that there's a ticket for you. It is on Tuesday, so you'll need to let me know soon. We are hosting a Queen's Park Day on October 24th. That'll be from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. We're still working on this, but we're working on trying to do a touch-a-truck event for MPPs and ministers, where they can go and sit in a giant loader and a snow plow and understand what a snow raider is, and see what brine equipment looks like, and have some photo ops. And we'll also be meeting with lots of MPPs and ministers that day, and then we'll be hosting a dinner that evening at Queen's Park. So massive lobby that we're undertaking. So on top of that, we're always and regularly continuing to advocate for the balanced expectation of liability between contractor and property owner. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So yeah, as Joe mentioned, we'll be sending out a follow-up email at the end with the link to the video, like the recording, possibly some of the presentations, and some of the links to some of the material that we were talking about today. So now we have Dion.
Do you want to come up here just because the microphone's here?
Yeah, that might be better.
You can just use my computer. I'll set it up for you.
Okay. So Dion is from Liquids Revolution, and he is a contractor. He's talking about contractor approach to winter maintenance using exclusively.
Oh, you're the fish bar, right? Fantastic. Should be able to make that work. So thanks a lot for inviting me, and thanks for putting this all together. Our approach to winter is similar to the idea of reducing salt, but we don't use any dry salt in our application of service in the winter. We started in, what does this say? It says we started in the 90s when we started putting liquid on the spinner. And from there, it's turned into all liquid all the time. And it's made our business a lot more routine than winter has ever been. I know you all know what a de-icer is. I'm going to explain what we do and why I call it liquid de-icing and not brine application. So a liquid de-icer is just, you take something, you take a de-icer, you put it in water, you melt it. Usually salt brine, and at about 23%. So if you have 1 kilogram of salt brine, it makes a gallon of water. So we say 4 liters. That is the base at which we use, because salt brine in and of itself, it has lots of limitations. It can only melt so much, it's pretty slow. And when it gets cold, it doesn't freeze, but it doesn't really do anything. So we blend other de-icers into it. A lot like what Antonio has, he blends a carbohydrate in with his brine. That's what you have the fusions of different blends. We use either calcium or magnesium. We blend it in to the salt brine to change what it can do. The problems with refreezing are often completely eliminated, as well as there isn't any winter condition that we can't use liquids. This one? Oh, this is the different de-icers that we've used. I don't want to say we've used all of them, but we've tried a lot of them. We blended different de-icers together to see what happens. We use a lot of research that came from Minnesota, Wisconsin. They've all done lots of really detailed research of taking de-icers and putting them in a freezer, seeing when they freeze, as well as pre-treatment. So this is where we took the information that was available and moved it into what works for us as a contractor. Just using anti-icing was fantastic. It provided us with substantial traction for plowing. Like the plows could plow at full speed, no matter what the conditions were. If you had a 150 horsepower loader, there was 30 centimeters of snow on the ground. That loader was getting its wheels on the ground and pushing it into a pile, versus what you saw from earlier when they were showing those pictures of the snow that was plowed and the permeable and the asphalt, where there's that big layer of snow. That really slows down the application of plowing. These are guidelines to blending. I'm often asked how we blend and why we blend. And this is probably 8 years old. This is how we try and blend our de-icer. So on the right-hand side, you have salt brine. And on the left-hand side, this was at a time when we were correlating it with ground temperature. So as you move down the chart, as it gets chillier on the ground, you add in more calcium. Up to about 30%, because once you get to 30%, there's no need for more than that. The application rates, 75 to 85 gallons per acre for a post-application application. And then as it gets as there's more on the ground, like when we say heavy snow, or like in advance of a snow, freezing rain event, 90 to 120 is the range that we do. And then we usually do somewhere between 10 and 15%. So these are guidelines. I don't know if they really make a lot of sense to anybody but me. These are the people that I studied in advance of deciding I had it with traditional dry salt application. These were really, really, really helpful. They provide you with the nuts and the bolts of actually how to do this. Now, I don't know that any of them actually took it to the point of implementation of what they have come up with, but that's what you need. Application of liquid de-icer. It's sprayed from the back of the truck. It's sprayed on sidewalks with like the garden hose that you have at home. You just put the liquid there in advance. Now, how far in advance? We found it's basically only based on how much precipitation comes down. Initially, we thought it had to do with time. We thought you could only put it down a certain amount of time in advance of a snowstorm. So we tried stuff. So, and it doesn't seem to matter. The amount of precipitation is only liquid, is only the amount of liquid that passes through the liquid you put there that removes it. Now, that being said, there's always concerns about it in front of a freezing rain event, as freezing rain, you would think, would wash it away. But it was already talked about earlier about sticking the product to the surface. So the de-icer, so salt brine is 1.076 specific gravity. Water is 1. By adding additives to it, you not only increase its ability to melt stuff, its melting potential, you also increase the weight of the liquid. So as the liquid gets heavier, it's actually able to displace accumulated water on the surface and put itself down through the water onto the surface. We don't suggest that until you have a firm grasp of what you're doing, but it is possible to go through 20 millimeters of rain in advance of freezing rain and still have the desired effect that the freezing rain is shed from the surface. It doesn't stop freezing rain. It doesn't always melt everything that comes down, but it will stop it from bonding to the surface. So you have slush, but you don't have ice. So in our world, that means safe conditions. You don't have to race to. So what the liquids have done for us and what the pre-application have done is it's taken the emergency out of an ice storm. So we pre-apply, and we pre-apply at realistically 120, 15% for a good size freezing rain event. Then we wait until the cities have taken care of the roads and made them so that our equipment isn't sliding all over the roads. And then we can go and either scrape off, just because the ice will just scrape right off, you have a wet surface, or if we have to reapply because it's beginning to crust on top of the surface, then we'll reapply. Yeah, application rates, I have it in gallons per acre. We can do it in liters per hectare, but nobody I talk to does liters per hectare. So this is how liquid de-icers work. And you all have a firm understanding of the science. It gets down and it breaks the bond of the snow from the surface. So once the snow and ice once the snow isn't stuck to the surface, it doesn't make ice. Traffic will just turn it into that nasty, what we call cement. It's thick, it's heavy, but it's not unsafe. It's not slippery. Your boots, they're all wet. Your pants, they're covered in draft. But, you know, then you have what you need is time. Time has been bought to clear the accumulated snow, but we don't have ice. And any pre-application does this. This is what contractors are adopting. They're adopting, let's give ourselves some time. Let's make it so that our due diligence is done in advance, because it's not sticking to the surface. Okay, it's a little messy. Everybody wants to see bare pavement, but you know, bare pavement is what we've been doing. And that's a lot of salt. These are some of the challenges that we've been faced with. The biggest one by far is the no evidence that the de-icer has been applied. So if somebody comes to the property and can't see salt on the surface in the winter when there's been some type of winter weather, the assumption is that no service from the contractor has been received. That has forced other ways of documenting our service that has been provided. Whether or not the surface is slippery, whether or not snow has accumulated, the fact that there isn't salt on top equals we haven't provided service. So that took some time getting used to. An advanced understanding of snow and ice maintenance, most contractors now have that. For the making of liquids, not only is the quality of salt a problem if you're making your own salt brines, but there's not a lot of suppliers that are providing liquids to the contractor market. It's changing, it's coming, but salt can be bought quite readily in the back of a dump truck. Liquids isn't quite there yet, but it's coming. Yeah, customer education, that's an ongoing thing, but it's getting better. People are coming around to the idea that safe doesn't have to mean I can see the salt or the ice melter on the surface. Snow and ice winter management practices for contractors. Timing is different. How you understand how much goes on the surface is different. There's a lot of differences from a staffing perspective with liquids than with salt. That's gonna take time, training, and mistakes. And suggesting to snow professionals that you're going to do this, it's going to be different than most of the stuff that you've done in the past, as well as you're going to make mistakes, leads to a more difficult conversation about liability. So therein lies the challenge to get contractors and staff to understand that we're gonna work at this and we're going to make mistakes, and we need to recognize when it works and when it doesn't, because you're not going to be perfect. At least I haven't met anyone yet. The reasons why we use de-icer. We found that we're using 37, I think Rakib told me 37% of the chlorides that we did in the past on the same properties. Some of the properties that we do are black pavement contracts. They have to be clear. It doesn't snow in these places. So, so that is why that's what sort of drags up our percentage. On properties that have a reasonable level of service, we're at 27 or 28% of the chlorides we've used in the past, while creating better conditions than we ever have. So it just makes sense from an environmental perspective. It's it's difficult to over apply liquids. We tried in the past as part of our training to not tell people how much to put down, and just have them just have at her, and you just put down as much as you think. When the product begins to run off the surface, as water does, people will inherently stop applying. Well, the right amount to apply is just in advance of it running off the surface. So we find that it's difficult to over apply in snowstorms when people are going over and over and over on the property. Can they over apply? Okay, they can, but if they're using nearly 70% less chlorides than they would in the past, over application doesn't come with the same risks that as over application of a salt product. And if too much is put down during a snow event, it waits until the next snow event to be used again. So we've determined that there is no over application. Vegetation, it doesn't die like that. Those cedars, those cedars and evergreens we had to replace, and we've replaced them. I really should have got. We haven't replaced them. That was about 9 years ago. They were replaced. We don't replace them anymore. We will kill about a strip about 6 to 8 inches off the side of that driveway. During the winter, it will go brown, and then we don't kill the roots, we kill the top, and then it'll grow right back in the spring. So
use liquid.
it's it's a different technique, and it makes it much easier to deal with the surrounding landscape. Economically, it's better at melting snow. It's a more efficient use of the de-icer. So technically speaking, it is more economic than using salt, but not in the first year, not in the second year. It takes at least 3 years for one to have acquired enough infrastructure, training, and routines in order for any of the savings to be seen. Now, one lawsuit, and it's all off, because liquids is going to make it such that, well, you're probably not going to get the lawsuit, because it's not going to be unsafe. It's because the step up off of the parking lot onto the sidewalk, or any of the steps on the property, those are the hot spots. Those are the areas that receive the most slips and falls. Liquids goes up over the surfaces. It can take the vertical as well as the horizontal surfaces, and it can free them of snow and ice immediately. Whereas salt, it's heavy, it falls off. It uses labor and equipment substantially more efficiently. The speed of application takes about 50% of the time to apply liquids as it does to apply salt. You're 30, 40 feet wide, moving in the neighborhood of 20 to sometimes 40 kilometers per hour. Getting around obstacles in the parking lot, you can miss cars, you can miss people. The product gets people wet. It doesn't damage the hoods of cars. It doesn't pit surfaces because it's constantly being thrown at it. So, and in the end, the best part is it's always clean. In the winter, it's not a mess. It's free of all that debris that we see tracking into buildings, going into your cars. It's just not there because the rock and debris that is in the salt that is being spread, that's sitting in my brine maker. And so all you have is the de-icer that is It keeps everything clean and it sticks a lot. Like it's difficult to track it into buildings. It's difficult for the cars to wear it off the surface. So the conclusions that I've come to, are that salt application dry salt application is in no way sustainable the way that we're doing it. And if we want to fix the problem, we got to lead, and this is a solution. And this solution is not new. This one's been around like forever because salt has always melted into water. Let's just use the melted version because it really, really works well. And liquid de-icing creates safer conditions throughout all the winter events. Anyway, that's how we do winter.
Thank you, Dion. It's nice to have a perspective of what you find is working from a contractor's perspective as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate you doing that. Thank you. Okay. Lauren, I'm going to take control of this thing. Just quickly, I just wanted to have.
You're not sharing.
Oh, you're not sharing, or I'm not sharing. Sorry. Oops. There. All right. Here we go. Smart About Salt. We've had a few presenters actually discussing the Smart About Salt. So just wanted to show everybody that there is a website that you can go to. There is a lot of information, a lot of resources, and it does tell you about all their different training programs that they have. So I would recommend, if you have not visited the website, to go to the website. It's smartaboutsalt.com. So that's an easy one, and we will share the links at the end of the day. So there is training for the contractors as well as facility owners and operators. So please have a look at that. There's also resources for some information about, how salt affects the environment. And we had a lot of discussion about that today. But it does talk about your buildings. So if you are a property owner, there is definitely going to be some damage to your buildings or your facilities. So it's good to have an understanding of how that salt is affecting your building, how it's affecting your parking lots. So please go into smartaboutsalt.com and have a look around. Again, there's more resources about how the salt actually works and what temperature it works at. And some winter tips about wearing sturdy footwear. We've talked about that quite a bit today, and we seem to be, at least we're spreading the same message. So that's a good thing. And the region of Waterloo, they've always been the ahead of everybody in their less salt programs. So they have a lot of campaigns that they try and get their residents to use less salt because it is affecting their water. And with that, Waterloo also has information and resources on their website, on the Waterloo website. And so I would recommend that you go there, and we'll send that link as well. So the Region Appeal actually kind of followed suit with Waterloo. And we have created winter maintenance for commercial properties. We call it our toolkit. And it talks about the issues that property owners would face. And then in collaboration with CBC, we have put some resources for business and property owners. So if you just click that little plus sign, you're going to get contractor management and procurement. So there's some links there. We haven't reinvented the wheel. We're just providing links from all different sources for you, whether it be Landscape Ontario, we've got STEP in here, we've got TRCA and CDC. Any of the information that we could find out there, we just kind of brought it to one place. There's also talk about the certification and training. So that's the Smart About Salt training, as well as the salt application verified. Some do-it-yourself quick wins, promoting safety for at work when it comes to winter maintenance, and then some additional resources like articles and news releases and some videos. So that would be for property owners. And then we also have a little bit of information for contractors, talking about calibrating and how to do that with your equipment, which is super important to making sure that you, if you say you're putting this amount of salt down, that you actually are, your equipment's calibrated. And also certifying and promoting your company through the Smart About Salt program again. So one last thing I wanted to just mention, on the Peel Region commercial property site, we also have weather map. I'll just go into there. So the region has 6 + 3 in Mississauga. We have ARWA stations, which we get the forecast information from. And we use that obviously internally for our road operations. But we have a public site that I just wanted to highlight, that these are the sites here, the little green dots. If you click on the site, you get a picture as well as the information that's coming from that ARWA site. So it'll tell you real time what's happening there, as well as if you go to the top, there's a forecast for the public. So if you click on that, it opens a PDF. So I'll just open it down here because I have it open. And it'll give you a 14-day forecast. So if you're a contractor or a business owner, this is free. It's Peel specific, but if you are near or around the region of Peel, then you can be getting free forecasts. And also, the cameras also give you an idea of what's happening. And so that's just another resource that I find would be helpful to contractors and property owners. Okay, so those are the resources. We'll put all the links, we'll send all the links to everybody. Just find my meeting again. Okay, so we do have a question session right now for anybody that has any questions, and I think you had a question? You had it. And in the chat, yeah. Go ahead.
So on highways, we have a database where we look at number of crashes. So Ministry of Transportation has this database, and we have a target standard. So for every 1 million kilometers traveled, they don't want the number of crashes to be more than 1, or whatever is the set standard in different highways. So my question is for parking lots. If we don't have a database currently monitoring how many slip and fall insurance claims happens, so one way of knowing do we put the right amount of salt on a parking lot is to quantify how many injuries occur on a given parking lot. Because if you're not putting enough salt, then you may have more than what is an acceptable level of risk. So if you want to come up with a standard of what is acceptable level of performance or winter maintenance on a parking lot, the way we do it on highways for different highway classes is based on that risk for accidents, for crashes. So here would be the number of slip and falls. So if we have that database, or if we start collecting on our properties, then we know if the level of service is acceptable level of risk. So that's one question of comment. The other one is liquids are very important for parking lots. We heard about that today. So let's talk about recycling, because you showed us even rivers can flow at 20,000 milligrams per liter. So that stormwater that runs off your property has a lot of salt in it. Why aren't we recycling some of that, adding some more salt to it and put it back on the parking lot as liquid? Because when I look at that property in Seneca or CDC parking lot, that stormwater has a lot of salt in some storms. And if it's going to a place underground, maybe in a storage tank or stormwater pond or whatever is where it goes, if there is an opportunity to collect that and then use it with additional salt or calcium and put it back, then you wouldn't have to put, I guess you can recycle instead of overuse some of that salt back on the same surface. So that's another question or comment if that's something people think is worth exploring.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think some of the municipalities use their wash water from their trucks, doesn't contain soap, but they will contain that water and then reuse that water. So the idea is out there, but I think, yeah, it could be more explored and have more either businesses or the institutions or commercial properties use it.
So we won't let that brine run off to the environment. You capture it, keep reusing it over and over again in additional storms in that winter. Because that salt still can work. Well, it's a way and another way of one question I have is about permeable versus, so how much reduced, how much can we reduce salt application on permeable pavement versus impermeable pavement?
We don't know yet exactly. We just kind of theorized that because we see a lot more residual left over on the permeable, that we could theoretically reduce it, but we haven't.
So my question is about slope, because we heard today when you apply salt, you turn ice or snow into a liquid, but liquid has to run off or it could refreeze depending on pavement temperature or air temperature. So if you change the standard on how we do drainage in parking lots and let that run off or run faster, not stay for potential refreeze, because we heard some of the slip and fall insurance occurs where you have melt from that pile and then refreezes again overnight, depending on when the storm hits. So the question of the surface drainage and how quickly, whether it's permeable, which is a great idea, or other ways due to slope, if you can let that run or melt it removed, then you don't get the chances of refreeze. Then you would have to put more thought to deal with that potential slippery surfaces.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to consider for parking lot design that can reduce salt application. It includes things like how easy it is for the vehicle for the salt truck to drive around and make turns so it doesn't end up stalled in certain places where it puts down extra salt. But Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority have put together really great guidance on how to design a parking lot with salt use in mind, and like drainage and where you put your salt pile relative to that drainage is one of the key factors. Maybe I can make sure it gets shared with the resources, but yeah, it's on the STEP website resources as well. But yeah, we can make sure that gets distributed.
We have a few questions online. Andrew's asking, has the reduction in time that people have to submit a claim, I guess this one's for Joe, has it had any positive effects on the number of claims submitted and insurance premiums? Like you found your loophole, but is there actually positive?
It has, there has been a benefit. Yes, we've seen a slight reduction in the amount of slip and fall claims as a result of that. But the fraudulent ones still come in at 59 days. So it hasn't reduced the number of fraudulent slip and fall claims, but that was the true intention.
Yeah. Have to work through it, I guess. Darlene, did you capture all the, I was just kind of quickly scanning through the, there's lots of questions.
I tried to answer.
Oh, did you?
some in the
Okay.
chat, yeah.
Did you want to elaborate on some of them?
I could, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was one that I was just I was just starting to type a response to. Peter was asking, he said that he heard private parking lots can have up to 7 times the amount of salt. Yeah, in fact, you've seen way more than that.
Mhm.
What I'd suggest as a way the municipality can encourage property owners to work with contractors, promote the Smart About Salt program, encourage them both to participate in it together, and then encourage both the property owner and contractor collaboration pre-snow event. Because if they know as much about the site together as possible, then they can reduce the possible risks from freezing thaw and work around those and get them fixed ahead. Mitigation saves an incredible amount of.
Michelle's asking, is there more research on pavement surfaces for walkways and parking areas that actually have more friction rather than just regular asphalt or concrete? I don't know if anybody has an answer to that.
Aware of any?
No. Might be a good way to go though. Change your material. John from Halton, has anyone determined what contractor owners are doing that are have successfully protected themselves against the claims, like documentation of winter maintenance practices implemented?
Yeah, I did respond to that one too.
Yeah.
So, like I said in the chat, being able to definitively capture through systems when the snowplow operator arrived with their salter, being able to demonstrate where the de-icer was applied, how much of it was applied, and the route that they took, all helps during discovery. Although we've seen all different types of definitive evidence be carried at different weights and not always considered valid. So it really depends on the situation. It's so situation dependent.
Their questions are just flying.
Someone has their hand raised.
Oh, hand raised, yes.
Like John?
Yes. Sorry. John.
Hi there. Yeah, I was just that was my question, Joe, that you responded to. So I really find contractors, everybody's on board to put less salt down, right? That's the goal. But if it's not in the contract, when contractors are bidding for contracts for private or public, they're going to do what the owners want. So if they want them to apply more salt, they'll come back to the parking lot or they'll come back to the road and they'll do it, or they'll just do more because they don't want that risk. So, telling people to wear different clothes or not wear flip-flops or wear winter tires, that's a behavioral change. And I think the root problem is really shifting that risk. If you want to wear flip-flops, go ahead, because you're not going to sue me because I have the documentation in place that shows that I was on that parking lot and I did my due diligence. Or if the driver wants to drive summer tires, then go ahead, because I have the documentation and it's you that's taking the risk, because I have the documentation that shows and will protect me in court. I think everyone's on board to improve this and improve the environment, improve, the corrosion that's happening on the infrastructure. But if you're going to change that risk and have contractors on board, you got to show them that, hey, if I do this documentation, I've done the Smart About Salt certification. I've been involved with salt for quite some time, and that just ensures that you have that documentation in place, so and protects you. So I think that's the solution, is documentation, to be honest.
I agree.
Yeah, one of the models that we've been looking at is the New Hampshire model, the Green Pro Snow Contractor accreditation. That's what we modeled our curriculum accreditation after. So part of what we're lobbying provincial government to do is once a snow contractor has demonstrated that they fulfilled the requirements of the accreditation process, that they would not be held liable for those claims.
Right. And I think that's what you need to do is just change that. And I think the contractors will follow along. Owners will set up their contracts to follow certain practices as long as they know they're not taking on risk of being sued or have claims put against them. Insurance companies will be on board because they're not going to have claims. I think you just have to have that documentation, really, and know the weather, know your conditions, and know your sites. And there's so many different variables, but if you can document it, I think you've shown that you've done your due diligence in protecting yourself against any practice or any weather conditions.
Thank you. Claudio.
So going back to John's comment, a lot of us as building owners, we do that documentation. We do our due diligence. We document amounts of salts that are being, when, how much salt is being put down on our properties. And that's good, I guess, paperwork that we can collect in case we get sued. But that doesn't stop people from taking the legal route. It's good when we're litigating a lawsuit, but it doesn't stop people from, because like you said, it's the human factor that it's unpredictable. Yeah, we can tell people to put snow tires on, but they still don't, to wear proper footwear in the winter. That doesn't happen either. It is a layer of protection that some of us already have. It doesn't stop the legal system from suing our entities in our buildings and in our corporations, and also it goes to the contractor as well, right? And again, the issue is cost as well, because if the contractor has 3 or 4 lawsuits happening at the same time, their insurance goes up. The insurance, and it's only fair that the contractor passes on that cost to the property owner, right? And us as responsible municipal stewards of taxpayers' money, sometimes it's just what we need to do to protect ourselves and to get the service that we require.
Yeah, probably feels like a fighting challenge. We have a question in the room.
Maybe more of a question for Lorna, but I'm just wondering what the cost and accessibility is of the beaches, and for smaller contractors, if they're able to maybe do a hand method if it's a really small property, or even for the liquid brine application.
I'm honestly not sure we didn't directly purchase the beach juice. We hired the contractor to apply it, and then the contractor has that built into their costs. So I'm not sure. We could purchase it ourselves and apply it ourselves. But then as soon as us as the property manager starts taking any kind of responsibility for maintaining it, then we're taking on additional liability ourselves. And especially with liquids having a big learning curve, and if you don't do it right, if you don't put down enough, then you could, be refreezing your surface rather than making it better. So I think it would present a lot of risk for an organization like CBC and the way our property works.
Or even for the region to take that on as an individual to choose to do the beet juice on their own properties rather than hiring a contractor.
Oh, on your private residential property. Yeah, I think it would be great if people were wanting to do that on their own properties. Yeah.
And then I just had a question for Seneca, if they've had trouble maybe finding contractors who want to do these, like, fit all these environmental standards that you guys have and sustainability? And if you're kind of limited to a select few each year that are willing and wanting to do these?
Sorry?
When we went to RFP, we only had one company come back that had a brining process. So, but that was 3 years ago. There might be another one now.
And that's why we also too, like when we make these standards, like for anything that we do, even like standards for new buildings and whatnot for sustainability, we don't have things be prescriptive. Like when we're doing at the RFP stage, we don't say you have to do a specific technology. It's what are you, like, what does sustainability mean to you and your organization? What alternatives do you have? Because again, with that whole liability, we don't want to prescribe something and it potentially not be like the best practice and whatnot. We want to leave that to the industry experts so coming to us with their solutions and we can evaluate it from there. So we do those high level, what is your sustainability initiatives? Do you have a sustainability program? What environmental initiatives do you have in your organization? And then we create that work plan from that, right? So keeping things kind of more high level, because yeah, exactly. It narrows it down so much if you say we only will accept vendors that do this exact technology. That is not really even beneficial to us because that might not be the best technology in the area, right? So just working openly and letting them come to us with their environmental stuff and then evaluating from there.
I think that's important also because if we will be more prescriptive and saying that, okay, you use this, then we are taking liability on us, right? So, and there are certain things which are happening in the market which we may not be even aware of because it's not our daily procedure which we will be doing. So that's why going to the contractors or other people who have been testing different material, it's always useful because sometimes you have to mix and match things and that's where the value is, right?
So I don't know about Seneca, probably you have the same at Guelph. You need a parking permit to enter a parking space and park there, or whether it's a meter where you have to enter your license plate number. So could we put something that waive the right to sue? So you say this parking lot is a salt vulnerable area, it's maintained to some level of standard, enter at your own risk, and you can sue you have slip and fall insurance because this is how, because of environmental protection, we have to put less salt. So it's going to be slippery. If you want to park here, by all means, but don't come and sue us later. So some sort of a legal way of helping that property manager to still have standards in terms of how they maintain, but limit their liability just because of the sustainability goals.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's a lawyer question. But I think it's a good question. Like, would it fly? Could you do it and would it fly? Yeah.
Well, I think it's an excellent idea. Whether it protects us or it doesn't, it's another way to message them. We use we try not to put signage up everywhere, but we use Honk Mobile. So maybe there's a way we can put some messaging in through the app. It's another way to reach them, right?
And I like Seneca's idea of the policy as well for, having that policy. Claudio, maybe it's something we could do at the region is to have a policy. And if nothing else, it's just for awareness, right? If it doesn't have any grit.
That's all we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, there were a few more questions, but hopefully you're answering them, or we can send them to you.
If I didn't answer them online, then please send them to me.
There was one question about, you said there's 3 insurance companies that are.
Yeah, so I did.
What about the larger?
I did answer that one.
Okay.
But, I think there's probably closer to 10 or 12 now. So we're starting to see more carriers come into the market.
Okay, good.
So the market is starting to soften slightly. The rates have not bounced back.
No.
So that we're yet to see. I think we saw some insurance underwriters that wanted to get in on the really high insurance premium market. But hopefully, as we see more carriers come in, the rates will start to.
Okay. I'm just gonna do a closing. We do have a poll on the screen. If everybody could fill it out, it's just to rate the workshop. So did you find it useful? Was it somewhat useful? Was it not useful at all? Because you knew everything. So if you could just fill out that poll, and I'll just do some closing remarks. We'd like to thank all our presenters today. You did a great job and you've given us a lot to think about. Great information for us to take away. Thank you to all the attendees. We really appreciate you taking your morning to spend it with us. And we hope today's session got you thinking about the upcoming winter season and how you might manage your salt usage on properties that you own or you maintain. Please make sure you answer the last poll question so we can have an understanding if the day was useful. And thank you to Darlene and Lorna and for helping, organize this. And we hope everybody had a good day. Morning.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.